I had never thought that staying late after school would change my life. At 18, I was just another senior trying to survive the last few months before graduation. My grades were decent, but my attention was elsewhere. Sports, friends, and the kind of trouble that felt harmless until someone caught you. And then there was her. Mrs. Lauren Carter. The kind of teacher who could make even the most restless student sit up straight, though not always for academic reasons. She was in her late 30s, tall, with chestnut hair that caught the light and eyes that seemed to read straight into you. The other guys whispered about her in the locker room, and even some of the younger male teachers seemed a little nervous when she walked past. She taught English literature, but somehow she made Shakespeare sound like street poetry and classic novels feel like gossip you couldn't wait to hear. So when she asked me to stay after class one Tuesday, my first thought was, what did I do this time? Ethan, can you come see me after the bell? She said, her voice even, but her eyes holding me in place. Yes, ma'am, I replied, trying to sound casual. When the classroom emptied, I lingered by the door until it clicked shut. She leaned against her desk, arms crossed, the sunlight from the tall windows framing her in a warm glow. I've noticed your essays have potential, she began. But you're not pushing yourself. You rush. You cut corners. You let your mind wander. I swallowed, unsure whether she was about to scold me or give me a second chance. I'm offering you an arrangement, she continued, her tone shifting. 2 evenings a week, you stay after school for one-on-one tutoring. We'll work on your writing, your focus, maybe even your discipline. That last word hung in the air longer than it should have. Discipline. I echoed, raising an eyebrow. She gave the faintest smirk. Yes, Ethan. The kind that makes a man out of a boy. I couldn't tell if she was teasing or dead serious. The first session was awkward. We sat across from each other at her desk, the room empty except for the faint hum of the old radiator. She was patient but strict every time my attention drifted. She'd tap the desk sharply with her pen. Focus, she said more than once, her eyes locking on mine until I looked down at the paper again. An hour in, I noticed something. She leaned in close when she explained things, her perfume something warm and faintly sweet filling my head. When she stood behind me to look over my work, her hand would rest lightly on my shoulder. Not inappropriately, but enough that my thoughts were no longer on sentence structure. By the third session, she seemed to notice. You're distracted again, she said, not looking up from my notebook. Sorry, I muttered. Sorry doesn't fix it, she replied, closing the book. I told you discipline. She stood, walked around the desk, and stopped in front of me. Stand up. I hesitated, but something in her tone made it impossible to refuse. When I did, she stepped closer, until I could feel the heat from her body. From now on, if your mind wanders, I'll correct you. Agreed. I nodded, though I had no idea what that meant. She smiled faintly, almost like she was testing me. Good. Let's continue. A week later, I met someone new. Or rather, Mrs. Carter introduced her. This is Claire, she said as I entered the empty classroom for our session. Claire was in her mid-twenties, with short blonde hair, dressed casually in a fitted sweater and jeans. She had a confident, almost playful smile and eyes that flicked over me in a way that made my stomach tighten. "She's a friend of mine," Mrs. Carter explained. "Claire helps with the school's drama program, and I thought she could join us for some exercises." "Exercises?" I repeated, unsure if we were still talking about literature. Claire grinned. "Don't worry, Ethan. We'll make it fun." That night, instead of essay writing, we read dialogue from an old play, lines about power, temptation, and control. Claire read opposite me, her tone rich and teasing, while Mrs. Carter listened, occasionally giving notes. When I stumbled over a line, Claire leaned in, her hand briefly brushing mine. "Try again," she whispered. Mrs. Carter's eyes narrowed, but not in disapproval. By the time I left that night, I realized something: whatever tutoring this was, it wasn't just about essays anymore. And I had the feeling I was stepping into a game with rules I didn't understand, but wanted to learn. The following Thursday, I showed up early. I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was the way Mrs. Carter had looked at me during our last session, or maybe it was Claire's smirk that had stayed in my head for 2 days straight. The classroom was dim when I walked in, only the desk lamp on. Mrs. Carter was seated at her desk, glasses on, grading papers. "You're early," she said without looking up. I didn't want to be late. "Good," she replied, setting her pen down. "That's rule number 1, punctuality. From now on, you arrive 5 minutes early. No excuses." I nodded, feeling like I'd just been enlisted in something. She stood and walked around the desk until she was standing directly in front of me. "Do you remember our talk about discipline?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Tonight, we're going to test it." Claire arrived a few minutes later, carrying a stack of scripts. She was dressed in black, simple but flattering, and she gave me that same knowing smile. "What's the test?" she asked Mrs. Carter. "He's going to perform under pressure," Mrs. Carter replied, her eyes never leaving mine. "Perform?" I repeated. Claire set the scripts on the desk. "We'll read scenes together. But there will be distractions. If you break focus, you fail." Mrs. Carter's lips curved into a small smile. "And if you fail, there are consequences." I swallowed. "What kind of consequences?" "You'll find out," she said simply. The first scene was harmless, a conversation between two friends in an old play. I read my lines, trying to keep my voice steady. Claire was too good, leaning into her character, holding eye contact just long enough to make my pulse quicken. Halfway through, she casually reached out and adjusted the collar of my shirt, her fingertips brushing against my neck. "Keep going," Mrs. Carter's voice came from behind me. I forced myself to keep reading. A moment later, I felt Mrs. Carter's hand on my shoulder. She didn't say anything, just rested it there, firm and steady. My words stumbled. "That's one," she said softly. "2 more and you fail." The next scene was different. The characters were rivals, full of tension and veiled threats. Claire delivered her lines like a challenge, circling me slowly as we spoke. Mrs. Carter stayed seated at her desk, watching, but I could feel her gaze on me. When Claire stopped in front of me, she stepped just close enough that I could smell her perfume. My heart was pounding. I made it through the scene without another slip barely. Mrs. Carter smiled faintly. Better. But not good enough yet. By the third scene, the test had shifted. You'll read, Mrs. Carter said, but this time, Claire will give you instructions between your lines. You must follow them without breaking character. What kind of instructions? I asked. Simple ones, Claire said with a wink. Turn, sit, stand, maybe a little more. We started. I spoke my first line, she told me to step closer to her. I obeyed, keeping my voice steady. Then she told me to turn around slowly while continuing my next line. I could feel Mrs. Carter move from her desk to stand behind me again. Good, she murmured. But don't lose focus. Her tone alone made it harder to think. When the scene ended, Mrs. Carter stepped in front of me. Not bad. But you still react too much. We'll work on that. After the session, as I gathered my things, Claire lingered by the door. You're learning fast, she said quietly. But you should know she's not easy to impress. I've noticed, I replied with a small smile. She likes control, Claire continued. If you give it to her, she might give you something in return. Before I could ask what she meant, Mrs. Carter called out, Ethan, don't forget your essay for Monday. And don't be late. That weekend, I couldn't stop thinking about them. About the way Mrs. Carter could command a room with just her tone, and the way Claire seemed to enjoy pushing me just to see how far I'd go. I had no idea what I'd gotten myself into, but I knew I wasn't walking away. The next session, things escalated. Mrs. Carter had arranged the classroom differently, desks pushed to the side, leaving an open space in the middle. A single chair sat there, facing the blackboard. Sit, she instructed as soon as I walked in. I obeyed. Claire appeared from the storage room, holding a thin length of ribbon. She handed it to Mrs. Carter without a word. Mrs. Carter stepped behind me. Hands, she said. I hesitated. That's hesitation, she said coolly. Strike one. I placed my hands behind the chair. She tied them loosely, not enough to hurt, but enough that I felt contained. We'll see how well you focus now, she said. We went through more scenes, with Claire acting opposite me. This time, her distractions were bolder, walking behind me, brushing her fingers over my shoulders, leaning in close to whisper a line. Mrs. Carter occasionally stepped into the scene, delivering a correction or an instruction, her voice calm but firm. It was dizzying trying to remember my lines, respond to Claire, and follow Mrs. Carter's rules all at once. By the end, my head was spinning. Mrs. Carter untied my hands and looked at me for a long moment. Better. You're starting to understand. Understand what? I asked. She smiled faintly. That control isn't taken. It's given. As I left that night, Claire walked with me to the parking lot. "She's testing you," she said quietly. "Seeing if you can handle more." "More what?" Claire's smile turned playful. "You'll see." Monday came too quickly. The entire day at school felt like a slow countdown to the evening. I kept wondering what Mrs. Carter had planned, what Claire might do, and whether this tutoring was ever going to be about grades again. When the last bell rang, I walked to her classroom with the same mix of anticipation and nerves I'd had before a big game. The door was already open. Inside, the lights were dim, just like before, but tonight there was music playing softly, a slow, moody instrumental. Mrs. Carter was at her desk, wearing a fitted black dress that made her seem even taller, even more commanding. "You're on time," she said with a faint smile. "Good." Claire was leaning against the windowsill, dressed casually but still somehow deliberate: jeans, a loose blouse, hair pulled back. Her eyes caught mine for just a second, enough to let me know she'd been waiting too. Mrs. Carter gestured toward the open space in the middle of the room. "Tonight, we'll do something different. No scripts. No prepared lines. You'll respond only to what we give you, no overthinking, no breaking focus." "That sounds harder," I said cautiously. She arched an eyebrow. "Good. Hard is how you learn." The exercise started simple. Claire asked questions not about schoolwork, but about me. "What do you want most right now?" she asked. "To graduate," I said automatically. She smiled faintly. "That's the safe answer." "Try again." I hesitated. Mrs. Carter's voice cut in, "Don't make her wait." I swallowed. "I want to know where this is going." Claire's smile widened. "Better." The questions grew more personal. Some were about ambition, some about control, some about what I was willing to give up to get what I wanted. Mrs. Carter circled the room slowly, like she was studying me from every angle. "Stand up," she said suddenly. I did. "Close your eyes." I hesitated, but her voice made it impossible to refuse. "Now, imagine you're in a room, and the only way out is to follow instructions. Every instruction. Without question." Claire's voice came from my right. "What's the first thing you'd do?" "Listen," I said quietly. The exercise shifted again. This time, they moved closer, first Claire, then Mrs. Carter, speaking just inches from me, alternating commands and questions. "Take a step back. Turn toward me. Speak louder. Lower your voice." Each instruction came faster, sometimes contradicting the last, forcing me to choose instantly. I could feel my pulse in my neck. Mrs. Carter finally said, "Stop." The room went still. She stepped in front of me, her expression unreadable. "You're improving. But you still resist, even when you think you're following. You hesitate. You weigh your options." I opened my mouth to answer, but she raised a hand. "Not yet. We're not done." She turned to Claire. "Your turn." Claire led me to the chair in the center of the room, the same one from last week. She didn't tie my hands this time, but she stood close enough that I felt the edge of her presence. "Here's the rule," she said softly. Whatever I ask, you do. But you can't speak unless I ask a direct question. I nodded. She tested me small things at first. Lift your hand. Stand sit. Turn your head. Then, more unexpected ones: walk to the blackboard and write your full name in capital letters, cross out the last letter, rewrite it in lowercase, underline it twice. Every time I complied without breaking pace, she smiled. Mrs. Carter watched silently, only stepping in once when Claire told me to close my eyes and keep them closed until she said otherwise. I stood there in the dark, listening to faint footsteps. Someone moved behind me. A warm breath touched my ear. Mrs. Carter's voice, "Do you trust us?" I didn't answer. She hadn't phrased it as a direct question. A pause. Then, "Good. You're learning." When Claire finally told me to open my eyes, Mrs. Carter was standing across the room, arms folded. "That's enough for tonight," she said. "You passed the first phase." "First phase of what?" I asked before I could stop myself. Her smile was slow. "Of finding out how much you're capable of giving and taking." On my way out, Claire walked beside me again. "You're doing better than I expected," she said. "Better at what, exactly?" She gave me a sidelong look. "At playing her game. But remember, just because she's the one setting the rules now, doesn't mean she always will be." That hung in the air between us as I left. That night, I realized something important. This wasn't just about Mrs. Carter teaching me discipline, or Claire testing my focus. This was about control: who had it, who wanted it, and what happened when it shifted. And I had the feeling that shift was coming sooner than anyone expected. Thursday's session felt different before it even started. When I walked into the classroom, Mrs. Carter wasn't there. Instead, Claire was sitting at the desk, flipping through a notebook like she owned the place. "Mrs. Carter's running late," she said casually. "She told me to get started without her." Without her? That was new. "What are we doing today?" I asked. Claire's smile was slow, deliberate. Something a little less structured. She had me sit in the same chair in the center of the room, but this time she didn't give clear instructions. Instead, she started asking questions again, sharper ones, more personal than before. "What do you think of her? What do you think she wants from you? What do you want from her?" Each time I hesitated, Claire leaned in a little closer. "You can tell me," she said. "It'll stay between us." I didn't believe that for a second, but her tone made it hard not to answer. "I think she wants control," I admitted. "And do you like that?" A pause. "Yes." Claire tilted her head. "What if I told you she's not the only one who can take control?" Before I could reply, she gave the next instruction: "Stand up." I did. She stepped around me, almost circling like Mrs. Carter often did, but where Mrs. Carter was calculated, Claire was unpredictable. She told me to close my eyes, then moved silently. I felt her presence behind me, then in front, then far to my left. Her voice came from different directions each time she spoke. "Turn toward me. Step back. Stop. I kept following, but something about it felt different. It wasn't a test for Mrs. Carter's approval, it was Claire showing she could run her own version of the game. When she finally told me to open my eyes, she was standing much closer than I expected. You follow instructions well, she said quietly. But you should know not all instructions are worth following. The door opened. Mrs. Carter walked in, heels clicking against the floor. She stopped just inside the doorway, her eyes sweeping over the scene. Interesting, she said, her voice calm but edged. Starting without me, Claire. You said to, Claire replied, unfazed. I said to prepare him, Mrs. Carter corrected, walking to her desk. Not to take liberties. Claire smiled faintly. Maybe I thought he was ready for a different challenge. The air between them felt sharp. Mrs. Carter turned to me. Sit. I obeyed, feeling the tension rise. She took over the session, moving us back into her structured drills, clear commands, measured pacing. But I could feel her eyes flicking toward Claire every so often, like she was assessing whether her friend was still following her rules. Halfway through, Mrs. Carter stopped mid-sentence. Ethan, she said, what did she have you do before I arrived? I hesitated. She asked me questions. Told me to follow instructions. What kind of instructions? Just, where to move. When to turn. Mrs. Carter's lips tightened. I see. We finished the session without further comment, but as I was leaving, Mrs. Carter caught my arm. Ethan, she said quietly, in this arrangement, there's only one set of rules. Mine. Yes, ma'am. She let go, her gaze steady. Don't forget that. But Claire was waiting by the door again, leaning casually against the frame. You know, she said with a smirk, rules are only as strong as the people willing to follow them. I didn't answer. That night, I couldn't stop replaying it in my head. Mrs. Carter had been clear from the beginning she wanted control, structure, obedience. But Claire wanted something else. She didn't care about structure. She wanted to test limits, push boundaries. And now I was caught in the middle. The next session confirmed it. Mrs. Carter ran things tightly at first, but when she stepped out for a moment to grab something from the supply closet, Claire wasted no time. She leaned in close and whispered, what if next time, you follow me instead of her? I frowned. That's not the deal. She grinned. Maybe it's time to make a new deal. Before I could respond, Mrs. Carter returned, and the moment was over. But something had changed. Now, every instruction I got from either of them made me wonder what would happen if I didn't follow it. Or if I chose the other instead. And deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before I'd have to pick a side. I knew something was coming the second I stepped into the classroom. Both Mrs. Carter and Claire were already there, standing on opposite sides of the room like two opposing forces waiting for the signal to collide. Close the door, Mrs. Carter said. I did. Sit, she instructed. Claire leaned against the desk, watching. Or, she said lightly, he could stand gives him a better view. Mrs. Carter's eyes narrowed, but her voice stayed calm. "Ethan, sit." 2 seconds in and I was already in the middle. I chose to sit. Mrs. Carter moved to the front of the room. "Tonight, we're going to see exactly how far you've come. Claire will be involved, but I'll be leading." Claire's smirk deepened. "We'll see about that." The tension was thick enough to cut. They began together, at first alternating commands, circling me. "Stand up. Step forward. Turn. Look at me." But then the instructions started to conflict. "Face me," Mrs. Carter ordered. "No," Claire countered, "look at me instead." I hesitated, caught between them. Mrs. Carter's tone hardened. "You know the rules." Claire's voice softened, almost coaxing. "Or maybe it's time you make your own." I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. Mrs. Carter stepped closer, her presence demanding attention. "Follow my voice, Ethan." Claire moved behind me, her words warm against my neck. "Or mine." For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about training me. It was about winning me. Mrs. Carter represented order, discipline, structure, the safety of knowing exactly what to do and when to do it. Claire represented chaos, freedom, unpredictability, the thrill of never knowing what came next. And they both wanted me to choose. "Ethan," Mrs. Carter said firmly, "stand by me." Claire's hand brushed my shoulder. "Or stand by me." The air felt electric. I had no script, no rehearsal for this. I looked at Mrs. Carter, her eyes locked on mine, steady, commanding. Then at Claire, a spark in her gaze, daring me to break every rule I'd followed so far. I stood slowly, walked to the center between them, and stopped. "No," I said. They both froze. "I'm not choosing one," I continued. "Not when I can learn from both." Mrs. Carter's brow arched. "That's not how this works." "Maybe it is now," I said, surprising even myself. Claire grinned, almost triumphant. "I told you he'd break the rules eventually." Mrs. Carter studied me for a long moment, then the faintest smile touched her lips. "Perhaps you've learned more than I thought." She stepped back. "Fine. But understand, this balance only works if you can handle both extremes. If you can't, one will consume you." The rest of the session was different. Instead of competing, they began working in a strange rhythm, Mrs. Carter's measured control and Claire's spontaneous challenges weaving together into something sharper, more demanding. I had to think fast, adapt, keep my composure under pressure from both sides. By the end, I was exhausted but also exhilarated. As I was leaving, Claire caught my arm. "You played that well. Just, be careful. She's not done testing you." And as I stepped into the hallway, Mrs. Carter's voice called after me, "Neither is she." I walked out into the night air with my head spinning. I didn't know where this was heading, or who would push harder next time. All I knew was that the game wasn't over and I wasn't planning on quitting.